The fortress monastery of Keldrath Prime had stood for 2 centuries, and in its deepest vault, behind walls of quantum-locked steel, something ancient stirred. Thalras, the last of the Paraxian sovereigns, lay coiled in the darkness. His scales, once brilliant as dying stars, had dulled to the color of forgotten metal. The chain around his neck pulsed with a sickly green luminescence, a covenant restraint designed by the galaxy's most brilliant torturers. It fed on despair, grew stronger with rage, and had held him motionless for 200 years. The galaxy remembered why he was here. The Paraxian Wars had scorched 14 systems. Billions had died in Dragonfire. When the Covenant finally captured Thalras, they made an example of him, not through execution but through eternal imprisonment. A warning written in living flesh. This is what happens to those who defy the galactic order. Mira Lorne had been assigned to Keldrath Prime for 3 months now, the newest caretaker in a long line of forgotten souls who maintained the prison systems. She was human, a species so new to galactic society that most aliens still confuse them with the dozen other bipedal mammals scattered across the stars. Unremarkable, her Covenant supervisor had said during orientation. Humans are unremarkable. That's why you're perfect for this work. No ambition, no danger, Mira hadn't argued. She needed the job, needed the solitude. Earth was overcrowded and she'd lost too much in the colony riots on Mars. Here, in the silence of Keldrath Prime, she could almost pretend the universe was kind. Almost. She first saw Thalras during her 2nd week. The dragon was a mountain of shadow and despair. His breathing so slow she initially thought he was dead. The chain around his neck hummed its cruel song, and she felt its hunger like a weight on her chest. 200 years, she whispered to the darkness. One massive eye opened, golden, ancient and infinitely tired. Leave. Human, Thalras rumbled, his voice like continents grinding. Your pity is unwelcome. But Mira returned the next day, and the day after that. She didn't speak much at first, just sat beyond the quantum barrier and read her books aloud. Old Earth literature, Tolkien, Ursula Le Guin, Bradbury. Stories of dragons and humans and the strange space between them. Thalras pretended not to listen, but his breathing would synchronize with her voice, and sometimes, just sometimes, she thought she saw something flicker in that golden eye. Something other than despair. The other caretakers thought she was mad. It's a war criminal, they said. A monster. Maybe, Mira replied quietly. But even monsters get lonely. It was a winter. Night on Keldrath Prime, if you could call the artificial cycle of the fortress winter, when Mira arrived at the vault, carrying something the dragon had never seen in 2 centuries of captivity, a simple, ceramic bowl of soup. I made too much, she said, setting it just inside the barrier's edge. Thought you might. She trailed off, suddenly aware of how absurd this was. Dragons didn't eat human soup. The Covenant fed him nutrient paste through tubes. This was stupid. But Thalras moved for the first time in years. Slowly, painfully, he extended his neck toward the bowl. The chain blazed brighter, sensing resistance tightening its grip. Don't, Mira gasped. If you fight it, I am not fighting, Thalras said softly. I am reaching. His great muzzle lowered to the bowl. He inhaled deeply, not eating, just breathing in the steam. The scent of vegetables and herbs and something utterly, completely kind. A single tear rolled down his scaled cheek, and the chain screamed. The green light flickered, pulsed, then began to crack. Not from force, not from rage or power, but from something the Covenant engineers had never anticipated, had never thought to defend against: compassion. The chain had been forged to feed on suffering, to grow strong from hatred and pain. But kindness, genuine, uncalculated kindness, it had no defense against that. The energy matrix couldn't process it, couldn't quantify it, couldn't understand it. The metal liquefied, pooling on the floor like mercury tears. Alarms shrieked. Red lights bathed the vault. Somewhere above, Covenant guards scrambled into action. Thalras rose to his full height for the first time in 200 years, wings unfurling like solar sails. He could have destroyed the fortress, could have burned his way through the guards, escaped into the stars, resumed the war that had defined him. Instead, he looked at Mira. Why? He asked. Just that, why? Mira stood her ground even as the dragon's shadow engulfed her. Because 200 years is long enough, she said. And because I read somewhere that mercy is the only thing that separates us from the darkness. Thalras studied her, this small, fragile human who had broken an unbreakable chain with nothing but soup and stories and stubborn, foolish kindness. Your species is new to the stars, he said finally. Young, weak. The galaxy will try to break you. Probably, Mira agreed. But perhaps. The dragon's voice softened, carrying in it the weight of ages and the first hope he'd felt in centuries. Perhaps that is not what matters. Perhaps what matters is whether you break others first. The guards burst through the door, plasma rifles raised. But Thalras had already made his choice. He lowered himself before Mira, not in submission, but in something far more profound. In recognition. Tell your people, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of Keldrath Prime, that the Paraxian sovereigns remember this night. Tell them a human gave back what the galaxy took, dignity. Then, before the guards could fire, before the Covenant could recapture him, Thalras did something unprecedented. He surrendered himself back into captivity, but on his own terms with his head held high. I will serve my sentence, he declared. But not in chains. Never again in chains. And the galaxy, which had built its peace on fear and restraint, learned that day what humans had always known. Sometimes the strongest force in the universe isn't power. It's soup, offered freely in the darkness.